The air in the room was thick enough to taste a toxic cocktail of money, power, and fear, all swirling under the soft, indifferent glow of a crystal chandelier worth more than a family home. This wasn't just an office. It was a throne room of the untouchable class, a fortress of polished mahogany, rare art, and soundproofed walls that had absorbed a generation of whispered conspiracies and backroom deals. On one side of the vast, imposing table sat a man who was the living embodiment of the Epstein empire in all its chilling arrogance. He was a fixer, a creature of the gilded swamp, his Savile Row suit a thin veneer over a career spent burying the ugliest secrets for the global elite. His eyes, cold and reptilian, stared down the journalist across from him, a woman who had sacrificed years of her life, navigating a labyrinth of threats and dead ends to piece together the puzzle of Jeffrey Epstein's network. The cameras were rolling, a silent witness to the unfolding confrontation, but the fixer didn't care. He believed himself utterly untouchable, a gatekeeper to a world of unimaginable wealth and depravity, a world he had meticulously helped to protect for decades. He leaned forward, a predator sensing weakness, his voice a low, menacing purr, a sound engineered over a lifetime to intimidate, to crush, to end conversations like this before they could even truly begin. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he hissed, the faintest smirk playing on his perfectly composed lips. "You're chasing ghosts in a graveyard we own. This is a private matter, involving private citizens and their private lives. You are so far out of your league that it's almost comical. These are good, powerful men, pillars of society, titans of industry, men who shape the world you live in." He gestured vaguely, as if encompassing the entire skyline visible through the panoramic window. "Do you really think a little person like you, with your little questions and your misplaced idealism, can touch them? We will bury you in litigation until your grandchildren are in debt. We will shatter your reputation with 1,000 whispers and 100 headlines. We will turn your life into a living nightmare, a cautionary tale for anyone else who dares to peek behind the curtain. Walk away. This is your only warning." He sat back, confident, triumphant, the very picture of absolute power. He had deployed the same venomous threat 100 times before, in a dozen countries, and it had always worked. He believed he was invincible, that the walls of silence surrounding Epstein's horrifying operation were impenetrable, built on the complicity and shared guilt of the most powerful people on the planet, princes, presidents, prime ministers, and intelligence chiefs. He thought this was the final act, the predictable end of the story. He couldn't have been more profoundly, catastrophically wrong, because what happened next, in that very room, didn't just break the interview. It shattered the illusion. It ripped a hole in the very fabric of power that had protected Epstein and his enablers for decades, and it would change everything. The carefully constructed empire of silence was about to come crashing down, and the world was about to see the terrifying, unvarnished truth of who helped build it, who helped maintain it, and who was willing to do anything and everything to keep it hidden. Before we dive into this incredible confrontation, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss any of these explosive political moments. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. To understand the cataclysm that was about to unfold, you must first understand the two figures at its epicenter. They were more than just people. They were archetypes, avatars for two opposing forces locked in a struggle for the very soul of truth. On one side, you had the man who called himself Julian Thorne, and that name, like his suit and his accent, was a carefully curated piece of theater. Thorne was the ghost in the machine of the global elite. He wasn't a lawyer in the traditional sense. He was a guardian of secrets, a purveyor of influence, a man who cleaned up the messes left behind by the kinds of people who believed morality was a concept for the poor. His background was a tapestry of privilege and power, woven through the hallowed halls of Eton and Cambridge, then burnished in the exclusive private clubs of London and the shadowy boardrooms of offshore finance. He didn't build companies. He buried scandals. He didn't create value. He protected fortunes, often fortunes built on exploitation and corruption. For years, he had been a key operator in the periphery of the Epstein network, a vital cog in the machine that kept the horrifying enterprise running smoothly. His role was multifaceted. When a new, young, vulnerable girl was procured, he might facilitate the quiet creation of a trust fund or a scholarship, a golden cage disguised as an act of charity. When a politician or a prince was photographed in a compromising position on Epstein's Caribbean island, it was Thorne who dispatched the teams to buy the negatives, intimidate the photographer, or craft the press narrative that painted it, all as a harmless misunderstanding. He was a master of the non-disclosure agreement, a virtuoso of the veiled threat. He spoke the language of power fluently, a dialect of quiet promises and devastating consequences. He saw the world not in terms of right and wrong, but as a simple hierarchy. There were the players, his clients, his associates, himself. There were the pawns, everyone else. He genuinely believed that the powerful had a right to their appetites, and that it was his noble, if dirty, duty to ensure they could indulge them without consequence. He wasn't just working for Epstein's network. He was a believer in its ethos. It was the natural order of things. His arrogance wasn't just a personality flaw. It was a worldview, a philosophy perfected over a lifetime of never being told no. Across the table sat Anya Sharma, and she was everything Julian Thorne was not. She was not a product of privilege. She was the daughter of immigrants who ran a small grocery store. A woman who had fought her way into a journalism career not through connections, but through sheer unyielding tenacity. She started in local news, covering city council meetings and zoning disputes, honing her craft on stories that mattered to her community. But she had a fire in her, a profound, unshakable conviction that the most important stories were the ones the powerful wanted to keep hidden. While Thorne was sipping vintage port in Mayfair, Anya was in dusty courthouse basements, poring over flight logs and property records. While he was drafting NDAs to silence victims, she was spending countless hours earning their trust, patiently, gently, giving them the space to tell their stories in their own time. She had been on the Epstein case for 3 years. It was an obsession, a crusade. It had cost her relationships, sleep, and her sense of safety. She had been followed, her apartment had been broken into, and she had received anonymous threats that mirrored the very language Thorne was using now. But unlike him, her power wasn't borrowed from the wealthy. It was earned, painstakingly, fact by fact. She was prepared, not just with questions, but with answers. In her worn leather briefcase wasn't a list of talking points. It was a meticulously organized universe of evidence. There were sworn affidavits from pilots on Epstein's private jet, the infamous Lolita Express. There were financial statements linking his foundations to the personal bank accounts of prominent politicians. There were internal communications, from intelligence agencies, leaked by sources who had grown a conscience, that detailed how Epstein's network was not just a pedophile ring, but a sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation, using blackmail to control some of the most powerful men in the world. She wasn't just authentic. She was armed with irrefutable truth. Her demeanor was calm, her gaze steady. She wasn't there to perform. She was there to prosecute. Thorne's entire being was a performance of superiority. The way he held his pen, a ludicrously expensive Mont Blanc, wasn't for writing. It was a prop, a scepter. The slight, almost imperceptible British accent he affected was stronger when cameras were present, a subtle signal of old-world class and authority that he believed would intimidate and impress. He viewed Anya's earnestness as a profound character flaw, a sign of her commonness. In his mind, the world was a brutal Darwinian theater, and the strong, the wealthy, the connected, the ruthless had not only the right but the obligation to dominate. He saw Epstein not as a monster but as a master strategist who understood the fundamental currency of human desire and weakness. Epstein didn't just provide pleasure, he created leverage, and in Thorne's world, leverage was the only thing that mattered. He saw his work as a form of high-stakes statecraft, far beyond the petty moralizing of the masses. Protecting a client who had engaged in horrific acts was, to him, no different than a diplomat negotiating a distasteful but necessary treaty. It was about maintaining the stability of the system. If a powerful CEO's reputation was saved, thousands of jobs were preserved. If a prince's indiscretions were kept quiet, a key diplomatic alliance remained intact. This was the complex, sophisticated calculus he used to justify his actions, a self-serving logic that transformed him from a simple enabler of abuse into a guardian of global order. He was, in his own mind, a patriot of a nation with no borders, the sovereign state of the elite. And Anya Sharma was an insurgent, a terrorist threatening to blow it all up out of sheer, childish spite. Anya, however, drew her strength from a completely different source. She wasn't fighting for an abstract concept like the system. She was fighting for the people it had crushed. Her authenticity was born from the quiet moments that no one else saw. It was in the tremor in a victim's voice as she recounted her story over a cup of tea in a safe house. It was in the look of fear in a source's eyes as he handed her a thumb drive in a darkened parking garage, whispering, "This is going to get us both killed." Her calm demeanor wasn't a performance, it was a discipline, forged in the fire of knowing that any crack in her composure would be exploited by men like Thorne. She had learned to compartmentalize her own fear, to channel her outrage into methodical, relentless work. What Thorne couldn't possibly comprehend was the sheer depth of her preparation. He saw a journalist. He should have seen an intelligence analyst. She hadn't just collected anecdotes. She had built a database. She used sophisticated software to cross-reference flight logs with social calendars, financial transfers with political appointments. She had created a detailed social network map that looked like a spider's web, with Epstein at the center, and every strand a connection to another powerful individual, fortified by dates, locations, and bank account numbers. She had spoken not just to victims, but to the peripheral figures, the pilots, the housekeepers, the security guards, the accountants, the people Thorne and his clients never even bothered to see. They were the invisible witnesses, and their collective testimony formed an unshakable foundation of fact. She was the hero not because she was pure, but because she was prepared. She knew that in a war against a man like Thorne, You don't bring a knife to a gunfight, you bring a nuke, and she was sitting on a full-scale nuclear arsenal of truth. This confrontation, unfolding under the cold glare of television lights, was never just about Jeffrey Epstein. To frame it that way is to miss the terrifying scale of the story. Epstein, the man, was a uniquely vile and predatory monster. But Epstein, the phenomenon, was something far more sinister. He was a symptom, a festering pustule on the body of a global system that had become profoundly diseased. This was not just a story about the crimes of one depraved billionaire. This was a story about the weaponization of secrets and the privatization of intelligence. It was about a shadow network that had fused the worlds of high finance, political power, and espionage into a single monstrous entity that operated beyond the reach of any law, any government, any semblance of morality. The battle between Anya Sharma and Julian Thorne was therefore a battle for the very soul of democratic society. What was at stake was the fundamental principle that we, the people, have a right to know who truly holds power and how they wield it. For decades, a horrifying new model of control had been perfected in the shadows, and Jeffrey Epstein was its grand master. His operation wasn't simply a sex trafficking ring for the rich and famous. That was merely the engine, the disgusting fuel that powered the real machine. The true enterprise was the accumulation of leverage. It was an intelligence-gathering operation, a private-for-profit CIA that traded not in state secrets, but in the personal, damning secrets of the world's most influential men. The model was diabolically brilliant in its simplicity. First, you create the perfect trap. You acquire a private island, a fleet of private jets, opulent mansions in the world's power centers. You create an irresistible ecosystem of luxury, pleasure, and intellectual allure. You host scientists, politicians, Nobel laureates, and tech billionaires. You make them feel like they are part of an exclusive club at the apex of human achievement. Then, you introduce the forbidden fruit. You provide access to a seemingly endless supply of young, vulnerable girls, presented not as victims, but as willing participants in a world of hedonistic freedom. And in every room, in every hallway, in every guest house, there are hidden cameras, hidden microphones. Every depraved act, every incriminating whisper, every moment of weakness is meticulously recorded, catalogued, and stored. This wasn't just blackmail material. It was the foundation of an empire of silence, an empire of control. When a rising politician needed campaign donations, the money would appear from an anonymous source, channeled through one of Epstein's labyrinthine foundations. When a powerful CEO needed a regulatory problem to disappear, a quiet word would be passed to the right government official. When a nation-state needed a crucial vote at the United Nations, they wouldn't lobby the ambassador directly. They would call the people who owned the ambassador's secrets. This was a parallel government, a deep state for hire, accountable to no one but its architects. And who were those architects? The evidence Anya Sharma had uncovered pointed to a terrifying conclusion. This was no amateur operation. The level of sophistication, the global reach, the technological prowess all had the fingerprints of a state intelligence agency. Whispers from her most trusted sources, men who had spent their lives in the CIA and MI6, kept pointing in one direction: the Mossad. The theory was as chilling as it was plausible. Epstein wasn't just his own master. He was an asset, a contractor for Israeli intelligence, running the most effective honey trap operation in modern history. He was providing them with an unbreakable grip on the private lives of the American and European elite, creating a generation of political and financial leaders who could be controlled, steered, and manipulated. This raised the horrifying possibility that some of the most powerful people in the West were not making decisions based on the interests of their countries, but based on the primal fear of having their darkest secrets exposed. This is what made the confrontation so much more than a television interview. Julian Thorne wasn't just defending a pedophile's enablers. He was defending a system of control that threatened the very foundations of Western democracy. He was a gatekeeper for a world where elections were irrelevant, where laws were for the little people, and where the most important decisions were made not in parliaments or presidential offices, but on private islands and in luxury penthouses under the silent, watchful gaze of a hidden camera. Anya Sharma, therefore, was not just trying to get justice for Epstein's victims. She was trying to pull back the curtain on the real Wizard of Oz. She was attempting to expose a cancer that had metastasized within the highest echelons of power, a cancer that had convinced its hosts that it was a vital part of them. The stakes couldn't have been higher. It was a fight for the truth in an age of manufactured lies. It was a fight for accountability in a world built on impunity. It was, in the most literal sense, a fight for who really runs the world. The takedown of Julian Thorne wouldn't just be a personal victory. It would be a blow against an invisible empire, a crack in the wall of a fortress that everyone knew existed, but no one had ever dared to attack. The confrontation began precisely as Thorne had intended. He was the conductor, and this was his symphony of intimidation. He launched his attack not with a roar, but with a sigh of patronizing disappointment. The kind a weary father might give a troublesome child. It was a calculated performance, designed to frame Anya not as a threat, but as a nuisance. Let's be perfectly clear about what is happening here, he began, steepling his fingers and looking directly into the camera, momentarily dismissing Anya's very presence. You are witnessing a trial by media, a sad spectacle fueled by innuendo, hearsay, and the frantic imaginings of a journalist who has become far too invested in her own narrative. Miss Sharma has spent years lost in a labyrinth of her own making, connecting disparate dots with the red string of conspiracy theories until she has created a monster that exists only in her mind. He then turned his gaze back to her, a predator savoring the moment. You speak of empires and networks and intelligence operations. It's all wonderfully dramatic, isn't it? It would make a thrilling novel, but this is the real world. And in the real world, what you call a network is simply a group of successful, high-achieving individuals who, over many years, have socialized and done business together. That is what people of a certain stature do. They fly on each other's planes. They attend each other's parties. They donate to each other's charities. To take this normal pattern of life among the global elite and twist it into some sinister plot is not just dishonest, it is profoundly naive. His attack then became more personal, more venomous. He began to dismantle her sources, one by one, with contemptuous waves of his hand. Your evidence, he scoffed, the word dripping with disdain, is built on the testimony of the disgruntled and the discredited. You've spoken to former pilots fired for misconduct. You've listened to housekeepers dismissed for theft. You've given a platform to women with deeply troubled histories, women whose stories have changed multiple times, women who are, quite transparently, seeking a payday from my client's deep pockets. These are not credible witnesses. They are opportunistic, pawns in your quest for a headline. You have no documents, no verifiable proof. You have only stories. And stories, Miss Sharma, are not facts. He leaned back, sensing he was cornering her. He believed he was exposing her for what he thought she was, an emotional, unprofessional crusader operating on righteous fury instead of cold, hard evidence. You see, this is the fundamental flaw in your entire crusade. You want so desperately for this evil, all-powerful cabal to exist because it would make you a hero, the brave giant slayer who exposed it all. But the truth is far more mundane. The truth is that Mr. Epstein's personal crimes, for which he was being held accountable, were his own. To try and drag dozens of respected public figures into the mud with him, based on flight logs from 20 years ago or a photograph at a charity gala, is the very definition of a witch hunt, and you, madam, are holding the torch. Throughout this tirade, this masterclass in deflection and character assassination, Anya Sharma remained perfectly still. She did not interrupt, she did not fidget, her expression did not change. She simply watched him, her eyes steady, her breathing even. It was the unnerving calm of a bomb disposal expert who has seen it all before. She let him exhaust himself, let him lay all his cards on the table, let him build his case on a foundation of pure arrogance and assumption. She allowed him to construct his own prison, bar by bar. He thought her silence was submission. It was the exact opposite. It was the silence of a predator letting its prey walk deeper into the trap. When he finally finished, leaning back with a look of smug finality, a profound silence filled the room. The fixer had spoken. He had dismissed the evidence he hadn't seen and discredited the witnesses he had never met. The air crackled with anticipation. Then Anya blinked, a slow, deliberate motion. She leaned forward, not with aggression, but with the quiet intensity of a professor about to begin a lecture. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice even and clear. "You've laid out your position with great theatricality. Now, allow me to present the facts." She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a simple, slim tablet computer, placing it on the table between them. She tapped the screen once. "You mentioned my witnesses, Mr. Thorne. You called them discredited, opportunistic, and troubled. You specifically mentioned a young woman, a key witness to the activities on Epstein's island, and painted her as a liar seeking a payday. Is that a fair summary of your position?" Thorne smirked. "It is. Excellent," Anya said. She tapped the screen again. A crisp audio file began to play, filling the silent room. It was a man's voice, professional and clear. Subject confirms timeline of events. Her recall of the island's layout, the staffing and the daily routines is 100% consistent with our own intelligence. Her description of the main house and the temple structure is detail perfect. Furthermore, her emotional state during the debrief was assessed by our consulting psychologist as consistent with profound trauma, not fabrication. Conclusion: subject is highly credible. She is telling the truth. The audio file ended. Anya looked at Thorne. "That was the voice of the lead investigator from your own firm, Mr. Thorne. From a private investigation you commissioned last year to assess the credibility of potential legal threats against one of your other clients, a prominent European banker. That was from his confidential report, delivered to you, concluding that this woman, the one you just publicly slandered as a liar, was, in fact, telling the absolute truth. I have the full unredacted report right here. Would you like to see the invoice your client paid for it?" The color began to drain from Julian Thorne's face. The smug mask didn't fall, but a hairline crack appeared. His eyes, for the first time, lost their patronizing twinkle and flashed with something else. shock. He had walked directly into her first, perfectly laid trap. Anya didn't wait for an answer. She swiped the screen on the tablet. A new image appeared, a complex color-coded chart that looked like a spider's web. You also dismissed the flight logs, she continued, her voice gaining an edge of steel. You called them a record of normal socializing, but they are not just lists of names and dates, are they? They are a Rosetta Stone for decoding a system of bribery and influence peddling. Let's take one specific example. On May 14, 2008, Prince Andrew, the Duke of York, flew on the Lolita Express from Teterboro, New Jersey, to Epstein's private island. You'd call that socializing. But what my research uncovered is what happened 72 hours later. She zoomed in on one part of the chart. A series of arrows connected shell corporations and offshore bank accounts. 72 hours after that flight, a payment of $250,000 was made from a shell corporation called the CS Foundation, a known Epstein entity, to a fledgling technology company, a company that, on paper, had no product and no revenue. A company whose majority shareholder was a close personal friend of Prince Andrew. The money was then funneled, through a series of transactions, into a trust that eventually purchased a property for another associate of the prince. It wasn't socializing, Mr. Thorne. It was a payment. It was a reward. And I have hundreds of examples just like it, linking dozens of your respectable public figures to financial transactions that occurred within days of their flights with Epstein. It was a rewards program for his most loyal associates. Thorne was no longer leaning back. He was sitting bolt upright, his hand gripping his expensive pen so tightly his knuckles were white. The air of superiority was gone, replaced by a tense, simmering fury. He opened his mouth to speak, to object, but Anya gave him no room. She was relentlessly, methodically dismantling his entire world. And finally, she said, her voice dropping, becoming graver. You made the claim that this was a private matter, that Mr. Epstein's crimes were his own. This is perhaps the most dangerous falsehood you've presented today. She swiped the screen, one last time. Displayed now was a scanned document, a single page, marked with a faint classified stamp at the top that had been crossed out. It was a leaked internal memorandum. This, Anya said, is a copy of a 2003 internal memo from a consulting firm that worked for a foreign intelligence service. It's an assessment of Epstein's network. It refers to him not as a criminal or a businessman, but as Asset Alpha. It describes his blackmail material, what it calls a library, as a strategic resource of incalculable value, and it contains one specific chilling sentence which I will quote directly. Asset Alpha's access to key figures in U.S. politics, tech, and finance provides a non-state channel of influence that surpasses traditional diplomatic and intelligence means. This wasn't a private matter, Mr. Thorne. It was a state-sponsored intelligence operation hiding in plain sight. And you weren't just a lawyer for a rich man. You were a functionary, a willing custodian, for a foreign power's blackmail machine operating on American soil. The silence that followed this final revelation was absolute. It was the sound of a universe collapsing. Julian Thorne sat frozen, staring at the classified memo on the screen as if it were a basilisk that had turned him to stone. The document, the Asset Alpha memo, was the kill shot. It was the irrefutable, undeniable proof that ripped away every last layer of his carefully constructed reality. The parties, the favors, the NDAs, the quiet threats he had always seen. Them as sordid but necessary tools for managing the appetites of the elite. He was a fixer, a cleaner, a sophisticated janitor for the powerful. But this memo reframed his entire existence. It told him that he wasn't just cleaning up messes. He was servicing a foreign intelligence asset. He wasn't a guardian of the system. He was a traitor to it. The arrogance, the condescension, the entire persona of untouchable power, it all evaporated in an instant, replaced by the raw primal fear of a man who suddenly understands he is not the player, but the pawn. Anya let the weight of the moment crush him. She didn't gloat. She didn't say, "I told you so." She simply held his gaze, her expression one of grim vindication. Her work was done. The receipts, the investigator's report, the financial network map, the classified memo, an iron triangle of truth from which there was no escape. She had anticipated his every defense and prepared a specific, devastating counterattack for each one. He had come armed with bluster and prestige. She had come armed with his own firm's reports, his client's bank records, and a state secret. Finally, Thorne moved. It was a small, jerky motion, as if his motor functions were just coming back online. He looked from the tablet to Anya, his eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and panic. The reptilian coldness was gone, replaced by the frantic energy of a cornered animal. He tried to speak, but only a dry croak emerged. He cleared his throat and tried again, his voice a hoarse whisper. This is illegal, he stammered, abandoning all pretense of his earlier confidence. You have stolen documents, classified material. This is a criminal act. It was the last, desperate gambit of a defeated man. If you can't win the argument, prosecute the person who brought the facts. Anya offered a small, sad smile. The only criminal acts we are discussing today, Mr. Thorne, are the conspiracy to cover up child sex trafficking, the systemic bribery of public officials, and the operation of an unregistered foreign intelligence service to blackmail the leaders of the Western world. My sources, the brave people who risked everything to bring these documents to light, believed that the public's right to know about that outweighed the classification stamp on a piece of paper. I imagine the authorities will agree. That was it, the final nail. By mentioning the authorities, she had invoked the one power that even Thorne's clients could not always control. He was no longer a gatekeeper, he was a suspect. His carefully managed world of offshore accounts and private jets was about to be replaced by a world of subpoenas, depositions, and federal marshals. He looked down at his hands on the mahogany table, no longer seeing a throne room of power, but the cold, sterile confines of an interrogation room. He had walked into the interview believing he was there to destroy a journalist's career. He now understood, with sickening clarity, that he had walked into the public execution of his own. He had been so blinded by his own arrogance, so certain of his own superiority, that he had never once considered the possibility that she was better prepared, more ruthless, and more intelligent than he was. He had underestimated her, and in doing so he had sealed his own fate and the fate of the entire shadow empire he had worked so diligently to protect. The takedown was complete. It wasn't just a victory in a debate. It was the total, methodical, and public annihilation of a man and the corrupt world he represented. The performance was over. The only thing left was the fallout. The moment the interview feed cut, Julian Thorne collapsed. It wasn't a dramatic theatrical faint. It was an implosion. The carefully constructed scaffolding of his entire being, the suit, the accent, the arrogant posture gave way, and the man underneath simply folded in on himself. He slumped forward, his forehead resting on the cool, polished mahogany, his hands covering his head as if to shield himself from the invisible debris of his shattered world. The sound in the room was a low, ragged gasp, the sound of a man drowning in open air. He didn't speak, he didn't move. He just knelt at the altar of his own destruction, a fallen priest in a desecrated temple of power. Anya Sharma, meanwhile, calmly gathered her tablet and her notes, packed them into her worn briefcase, and walked out of the room without a backward glance. She didn't need to stay. The explosion had been detonated. Now all that was left was to watch the shockwave travel. And travel it did. Before Anya had even reached the elevator, a producer, hands trembling with a mixture of fear and adrenaline, had clipped the final 10 minutes of the interview, the takedown, and posted it online. It wasn't just a clip, it was a digital warhead. For the first few minutes, there was a stunned silence across the internet as people watched, jaws agape. Then, the eruption began. It started not as a ripple but as a tidal wave. The hashtag Asset Alpha appeared first, a single spark in the digital darkness. Within 60 seconds, it was trending. Within 5 minutes, it was the #1 trend worldwide, a blazing beacon of collective shock and outrage. It was immediately followed by a torrent of others. Hashtag Thorne Takedown, a tribute to the brutal efficiency of the kill shot. Hashtag Epstein, capturing the terrifying new dimension of the scandal. Hashtag The Library, a chilling reference to the blackmail material. And simply, hashtag Anya Sharma, the name of the woman who had single-handedly torn back the curtain. The reaction on social media was a raw, primal scream. A verified journalist from a legacy newspaper tweeted, "I have been covering politics for 30 years. I have never, ever seen anything like the last 10 minutes of the Thorne interview. This isn't a scandal. This is a constitutional crisis unfolding in real time." Hashtag Asset. An anonymous user posted a meme of Thorne's face, frozen in a mask of horror, with the caption, "The exact moment he realized he wasn't the predator, he was the bait." It received 100,000 likes in under an hour. A political activist wrote, "For years they told us we were crazy conspiracy theorists. They gaslit us, ridiculed us. Tonight, Anya Sharma proved it was all real, and worse than we ever imagined." Hashtag Epstein Spies. The established media machine, usually slow and ponderous, was thrown into a state of panic-stricken chaos. Newsrooms were scrambled. Anchors were rushed onto sets, their faces pale, trying to explain to a stunned public what they had just witnessed. The initial headlines were a testament to the sheer magnitude of the revelation. The New York Chronicle's front page, pushed online within the hour, screamed in a massive font, "Epstein was foreign asset. Leaked memo reveals. Fixer implodes in live interview." The London Guardian's headline was more succinct, but no less devastating. "The spy who bought the world." Every major news organization on the planet dropped what they were doing. The story of a celebrity divorce, a looming election, a stock market fluctuation, it all vanished, rendered utterly insignificant by the terrifying new reality Anya had unveiled. While the world was reeling, Julian Thorne was being quietly escorted out of a side entrance of the building. Shielded by 2 shell-shocked lawyers, the cameras caught a single fleeting image of him. He was a ghost. His face was ashen, his eyes hollow. The Savile Row suit hung on him like a shroud. This was not the confident titan who had strode into the studio hours earlier. This was a broken man, a public corpse walking toward a future that had just been irrevocably erased. His career wasn't just over, it was a toxic wasteland, a case study to be taught in crisis management courses for generations to come. The phone in his pocket was vibrating incessantly, a frantic chorus of his powerful clients all asking the same terrified question. What did you just do? But he couldn't answer. He had lost the ability to fix anything. He couldn't even fix himself. The fallout continued to accelerate, moving from the digital world into the physical one with terrifying speed. Within hours of the broadcast, emergency lights began flashing outside the opulent London headquarters of Thorne's firm. Teams of investigators from the National Crime Agency, their faces grim and resolute, streamed into the building, brandishing warrants. They weren't just seizing computers and files related to Julian Thorne, they were seizing everything. They were treating the entire firm not as a legal practice that had a rogue employee, but as a potential criminal enterprise, a key node in the very network Anya had exposed. The message was unmistakable. The old rules were gone. The era of untouchability was over. Similar scenes played out in New York, Geneva, and the Cayman Islands, as federal agents and international police forces executed coordinated raids on the offices of shell corporations and boutique financial firms linked to the Asset Alpha Memo. The spider's web, so meticulously mapped by Anya on her tablet, was now being systematically dismantled by law enforcement across the globe. The political consequences were even more immediate and cataclysmic. In Washington, D.C., the revelation that a foreign intelligence service may have been running a blackmail operation on American soil for decades sent shockwaves through the Capitol. The chairs of the Senate and House Intelligence Committees, in a rare joint press conference, announced an immediate top-priority investigation. Their faces, usually composed for the cameras, were etched with a mixture of fury and fear. This wasn't about partisan politics anymore. It was about national sovereignty. The question on every lip in the Capitol was no longer just who flew on Epstein's plane, but who was compromised, who was being controlled by the library. A deep, corrosive paranoia began to seep into the bedrock of American power. Every vote, every policy decision, every political alliance was suddenly viewed through a new, terrifying lens. Across the Atlantic, the reaction was just as severe. The British monarchy, already reeling from Prince Andrew's disastrous association with Epstein, went into full-blown crisis mode. Buckingham Palace became a fortress, its press office issuing terse, unconvincing denials that did nothing to quell the firestorm. Tabloid headlines, which had previously been salacious, now turned treasonous. Andy and the Acid screamed one, next to a picture of the prince smiling alongside Epstein. In France, Germany, and across Europe, prominent politicians and business leaders who had been named in Epstein's flight logs and address books went to ground. Some issued frantic denials through their lawyers. Others simply vanished from public view, their silence a deafening admission of guilt. The collapse of Julian Thorne's world was absolute. He was, overnight, the most toxic man on the planet. His prestigious law firm dissolved within 48 hours, its partners scattering like rats from a sinking ship, each one trying to distance themselves from the radioactive fallout of his hubris. His bank accounts were frozen, his assets seized. He was placed on every no-fly list imaginable. The exclusive clubs that had once welcomed him as a titan of industry now permanently revoked his membership, their crested stationery unable to mask the stench of fear. He was an outcast, a pariah in the very world he had once so arrogantly mastered. But the greatest punishment was not the legal or financial ruin. It was the social annihilation. The powerful clients he had spent a lifetime protecting now treated him as a leper. They didn't just abandon him, they actively worked to destroy him, feeding incriminating stories to the press to signal their own distance from the scandal, to offer him up as a sacrificial lamb in the desperate hope of saving their own skins. The fixer, the ultimate insider, had become the ultimate outsider. Meanwhile, Anya Sharma became a global icon of journalistic courage. She wasn't just celebrated, she was revered. She was the woman who had faced down the beast and won. She received job offers from every major media organization in the world, offers of multi-million-dollar book deals, and calls from film producers